Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we've got a really profound topic to dig into together. We're looking at a fantastic analysis by Nigerian researcher and writer Oluyomi Ola-David. She is someone who's absolutely passionate about global development, transformation, and actually generating solutions that influence real-world policy. In a brief but super impactful piece she wrote, she took a really hard look at the sudden disruptions we all faced during the pandemic, and she used them as a lens to examine some deep cracks in how we educate our youngest minds. Basically, she forces us to step back and ask, what does a truly resilient education system actually look like when the world literally just stops? So let's dive right in. The exact title of her analysis serves as the central anchor for everything we're about to discuss today. How can we ensure education for all during a pandemic or social crises? It is such a vital question, right? She's actively challenging that massive global development goal of education for all. It's pretty easy to champion that goal when times are good, but her passion for genuine, durable global development really shines through here as she asks how we maintain that standard when society faces a massive, out-of-nowhere shock. Section 1. The Education Lockdown Shock. Remember when the COVID-19 pandemic first hit? It was this intense new phenomenon that caused an immediate, systemic halt to life as we knew it. But what's really interesting is how she frames that halt. She doesn't just say, oh, school's closed. No, she specifically points out that the personnel and physical infrastructure provided by formal learning institutions were completely locked down. And she puts a huge emphasis on preschoolers here. Just think about that for a second. For our youngest learners, formal early childhood education provides an entire ecosystem. We're talking trained personnel, specialized physical spaces, daily routines, and literally all of that infrastructure vanished overnight. Section 2, the shift to home learning. Now, the need for education obviously didn't just evaporate when those buildings closed down. So the burden had to go somewhere, right? These are her exact words on the immediate pivot. There was a shift to household personnel and infrastructure for learning. I want to invite you to think back to your own household experiences, or maybe those of your friends and family, during that lockdown period. It was wild. The living room suddenly became the classroom, and the family computer, well, that became the entire school building. And the really crucial point here is that she rightly identifies how parents and home-based caregivers abruptly became the primary education providers. That household personnel she refers to, that's just everyday parents. They were suddenly thrust into the role of full-time educators without any warning, without formal training, and honestly, often without adequate resources. The entire model of early childhood education was radically decentralized directly into the home. Section 3, the remote learning divide. Of course, this sudden shift to the home wasn't a uniform experience for everyone. It completely exposed a stark socioeconomic contrast, painting a pretty clear picture of systemic inequality. She deliberately divides the fallout into the experiences of two distinct socioeconomic groups, poor children on one side and middle-class children on the other. And as you'll see, neither group received an optimal educational experience under this sudden shift to household infrastructure, but they suffered in very different ways. For poor children, the reality was devastatingly simple. She notes that children of the poor tend to have highly limited access to the internet, which was, of course, absolutely required for remote learning. Because of this structural lack of digital infrastructure in their homes, her observation is incredibly straightforward and really sobering. She says they were simply left behind. The educational process for these preschoolers, in many cases, just completely stopped. Now let's contrast that with the middle-class experience. You might assume they fared perfectly fine, right? Well, her insight reveals a completely different problem. She points out that middle-class parents often had to maintain their own remote work responsibilities during the lockdown. So because the parents were super busy working from home to keep the economy going and support their families, they couldn't exactly be full-time teachers. And the result, she argues these children may have been sentenced to excessive daily screen time as a kind of makeshift substitute for true early childhood engagement. Section 4. Early childhood left behind. This brings us to the really tragic conclusion she draws from these combined systemic failures. When the formal system shut down, the informal, home-based backups proved deeply flawed for everyone, just in different ways. She warns that with the absence of viable, pre-planned home-based learning solutions for early childhood education, education for all may remain elusive. It's a somber realization, isn't it? If a society can't properly educate its youngest and most vulnerable minds during a crisis, then that grand goal of universal education is failing right when we need it the most. It just remains a catchy slogan rather than a reality. Section 5, Building Resilient Systems. But you have to remember, Oluyomi Oladavid is a researcher who absolutely loves generating solutions. She doesn't just outline the failure and walk away, she pivots to a forward-looking inquiry. She wants to know how we can build resilience, particularly in underdeveloped economies, so this never happens again. To build this resilience, she calls on a specific network of stakeholders to step up and enhance home-based education infrastructure. She lists civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, and public policy. This perfectly reflects her own worldview, actually. In her biography, she notes that she is deeply influenced by her faith, seeing God as the wheel within my wheels, and she is incredibly driven to influence policy and strategy. She envisions a coalition where local community groups, religious institutions, and government policies all work together to support families when formal schools just can't. To get us there, she leaves us with two major questions to solve. Here's the first one. How can informal learning options, such as structured homeschooling, be encouraged during pandemics or social crises? Basically, she's asking us to legitimize and support structured homeschooling, not just treating it as a fringe choice, but as a vital, highly resilient backup system that society actively encourages and prepares for way before the next crisis hits. And she closes her analysis with this final exact question. What roles are there for civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, and public policy in enhancing home-based education infrastructure in underdeveloped economies? It's a really provocative thought to end on, because if the infrastructure of the home is the ultimate safety net for our children's minds, what is your community doing to strengthen that net right now? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope her insights leave you with a lot to think about today.